All set. All right, well, it's still afternoon. Good evening. Welcome to our public meeting, everyone, and I'll gladly call our meeting to order. And just in recognition of land recognition, that was acknowledged at our previous special meeting that we've just finished. And attendance, all members of council are present except for Councillor Houston, who's on personal leave. And to the members, any disclosure of pecuniary interest on the agenda as presented to you this evening? Hearing none, we'll have that duly noted. So the introduction and purpose of our meeting this evening is to hear comments from affected landowners and the proposed drainage works as set out in the drainage report filed by Mark Hernandez of Dillon Consulting Limited. And that was dated back in November 12th, 2021 for the repair and improvement to the Antaya drain. And so I'll pass this on to our superintendent, Mr. Paglia, and you can certainly introduce the group. Oh, Mr. Barton.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to sneak in here and introduce everybody to Alessia Musio. She is our new assistant drainage superintendent. She started a few weeks ago. And so I just wanted to introduce her to all of council and get her acquainted with the, I guess, the public meeting process tonight. So.
Well, you jumped the gun because I was going to say, to introduce your team, but anyway, welcome, Alicia, and congratulations on and welcome aboard.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right, Mr. Paglia, I'm going to pass it on to you again, and if there's any to introduce your guests, and also to if there's anything else that you want to add in the introduction. For the purpose of our meeting this evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to everyone, good evening and welcome. As I normally do, I like to give a quick review of what has transpired since the reports have gone out. Generally, we've received a handful of comments from the landowners, mainly in the L'Esperance Road or the upper end of the drain. These comments were generally Drainage Act in nature, and we provided some with a description of their assessments, how assessments are generated, that kind of thing, what they were responsible for, and also assisted them in understanding the drainage report that was in front of them. So handful of those. And then we have our delegates this evening, Gisette, Eugenie, and Jeff Sylvester. They raised a few valid questions, both technical in nature and assessment in nature as well. I'm going to leave it up to the engineers to go through those with you. We've met several times with them, and we're trying to find a resolve for that or something of the sort. So I guess at this time, I'd like to give it over to the engineers to give us that synopsis, if you will.
All right, thank you, Mr. Paglia. Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you very much and good evening. I'd just like to start by mentioning that I did ask Oliver Moyer from our office to attend tonight's meeting as well, as he was instrumental in preparing this report. So I've asked him to sit in and similar to Alessia, kind of take in this process. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background in addition to what Mr. Paglia mentioned. While Mr. Paglia has taken many calls, I am only aware of only one outstanding concern or one landowner with outstanding concerns, and that being the Sylvesters, the delegates this evening. And I'll quickly go over an overview of what we have discussed, and then I guess open it up for further questions. So there have been many conversations, emails, and the like, whether it's with Mr. Paglia and myself, and the Sylvesters. And to my recollection, there are 4 main areas. There may be others brought forward tonight, but there are 4 that I'd briefly like to speak to. The first one being technical and more directly related to tonight's meeting to consider the technical merits of the report, and the other 3 are more assessment related. But the first one is related to a yard catch basin, which is proposed in the upstream end of the drain. For context, the previous report was dated in 1971. And since that time, there's been significant changes in the watershed. The drain has been curtailed, it has been filled, sections have been filled in. So there's been some pretty significant impacts to that upstream section of the drain. And to address that, the report is recommending the reestablishment of the drain, generally what would be in line with the end of Blueberry Court northerly. The southern section is now all homes. And in order to reestablish that drain and provide an appropriate space from the rear fences of the homes that back onto Strawberry Drive, we're recommending that the drain alignment be shifted westerly. And there is a yard catch basin, which is an existing catch basin, and that will be impacted by this proposed works. Now, this is not part of the drain, it's private infrastructure, but it is being impacted by the municipal drain. So it does clearly sit in a low area of the rear yard based on our review of the available topographical information. And as a result of that impact, we are recommending the replacement of the yard catch basin and a new connection to the relocated drain. We've clearly identified it will remain private infrastructure. It will not be part of the municipal drain. And the estimated value of the work is $1,550. The yard catch basin's purpose is to collect both surface water and as a connection point for other underground piping, and then drainage to the Antea drain. And the cost is being assessed in our report to the entire watershed. And the reason for that is there's a lot that's transpired over the past many decades, and a lot of people who are involved who are no longer involved, landowners who are involved who are, where the lands have since changed hands. And in this case, to point back, to attempt to try and look back and assess responsibility for why things transpired the way they did, I think is quite difficult and not really practical. And so in these situations, what we feel is most fair is that it be would be assessed over the watershed and distribute the costs in that way. Again, this landowner didn't request it. This is not of some particular benefit to him. It is simply a result of the proposed realignment of the drain. So what has transpired since our last discussions with the Sylvesters is that further discussions have happened between Dylan and town administration. We're open to the idea that because it's not part of the municipal drain and it is private infrastructure, we could review this further at the time of construction. And if the grading will allow for it, and if the landowner is amenable, then we could consider an alternate means, whether that's swaling or whatever the case is appropriate at that time, in lieu of the yard catch basin. But to remove it, I think at this point, I think is something that we're not comfortable with. So that I'm hopeful is a reasonable middle ground to reach, or way to address those concerns. The other 3, I'll be more brief. They are related to assessment, and although I know this is more related, tonight's meeting is more related to the technical merits of the report, I did want to mention them because they were brought forward in our discussions with the Sylvesters. There were 3 items in particular. One is one of the properties being identified as non-agricultural and needing to be shifted to agricultural. We do agree with that comment. There was a comment about the consistency between the future maintenance schedule and the construction schedule. We've had further review of that and did identify some residential properties that need their factor areas adjusted to reflect in the future maintenance schedule to match the construction schedule. And lastly, there is the most one of the most downstream properties owned by the Sylvesters. We had identified the area based on the previous report, and at the PIC, the landowners identified that the actual area in practice was smaller. We had a subsequent site meeting, agreed to revise the proportion between the two municipal drains. And as an unintended consequence of that, it increased the frontage benefit due to the long linear shape of the property that remains after having made those changes. So what we're open to is as an adjustment to the frontage benefit for that property to bring it more in line with the others. So on those 3 items that were brought forward, we take no issue with the comments that were provided by the landowner, and we're certainly willing to go back and make those adjustments. So I just wanted to touch on those 4 items. They're the ones that I'm aware of, and there may be others, and I'm open to discussing them tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hernandez. At the moment, and any questions, members of council to, yes, go ahead, Councilor Jobin.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor, to Mark, if I may. So there is a catch basin on the properties. I didn't pull up the report. It just froze off on me. I believe it was number 7 and 8, right? Is that correct? And so those were privately installed. Is that correct? And they just service those 2 properties. So the issue is the cost being shared.
Ultimately, that is my understanding. Is it really comes down to the cost. I don't think that there's a technical issue with it being there, but I think there was some concern from the landowner about having to share a portion of that, and why the landowners who have the catch basin on their property aren't paying the full burden of that relocation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any further questions to our engineer? If not, then I'll certainly take this opportunity to open it up to our delegations. And I believe Mr. Sylvester or Ms. Eugenie, I don't know who's going to, both of you, or who's going to be the spokesperson? Oh, both? Okay, so.
No, I'll speak, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Mr. Sylvester, yeah.
Well, I'm being polite, so I gotta ask both.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to address council. I'd like to also thank Mark for making me feel old because of the many decades of age of the report. It happens to be my birth year in 1971. So, and thank you for making me feel my age.
Yeah, but in people years, you're still young.
So we believe, and this is what we brought forward, that the catch basin was installed as a result of the poor function of the drain, and that with the reinstatement of the drain, it wouldn't be required. So we're satisfied with evaluating it at the time of construction, and if it isn't required, that it's eliminated as a savings. So we're satisfied with that compromise that Mr. Hernandez has offered. And as for the other, they don't have any technical standing for this meeting, so we'll discuss that at the quarter revision. I'm sure we'll have more discussion before that happens, so that we can hopefully be come to some agreement or satisfaction that we're being treated equitably. So we appreciate your time, and we want to thank Mr. Hernandez for that offer of compromise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the certainly for your comments, Mr. Sylvester. Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Altenhoff.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to both groups of delegates. Thank you very much for kind of, I guess, working through the issues. I think we all appreciate that. The only thing I would kindly ask, just to try to resolve any future issues, given that there's an understanding on that first point as to how we've been moving forward. Just please, Mr. Hernandez, if you can, just make sure that the report has some verbiage on that, so it's kind of in writing that review at the time of construction will occur by both parties, just so that we're covering all the bases. But other than that, I'm glad to hear we can compromise on everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, certainly any further questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Paglia.
Yes, through you, your worship. I just want to add to Councillor Altenhoff's comments there. Procedurally under the Drainage Act, we, as Mark had mentioned, we have mainly some revisions that are going to happen within the schedules of assessments, which can be dealt with at the quarter revision. But there's also some administrative stuff that needs to be corrected in the report. It's my opinion that there's not enough there on the technical nature to send this report back now. But I just wanted to put it out there that we will be revising those sections. We mentioned one land that was listed as a non-ag land, which in fact is an agricultural land. So there is no financial effect because that appears in the special benefit assessment table. So it has no financial effect to the watershed, nor does it have an effect to the grant application. So it's just an administrative move, if you will, or change. And then the verbiage, obviously, from what has transpired from tonight's meeting. But that being said, in this case, one of my objectives always as a drainage superintendent, always in our work, all of us, is to be cost conscious. So we have a relatively small watershed. And so what we can do procedurally is send the report back at the quarter revisions, because we do need to make some revisions there, provisionally adopt it now, but give landowners the complete revised copy of the report. Printing costs on something on this particular watershed was a couple $100. And I think that it's reasonable to send them all a new copy of the report as opposed to sending them addendum pages, basically. So we will do that once the report goes back at the quarter revisions for the revisions that we'll talk about. And then we'll send a complete copy of the provisional bylaw with the updated revised report, if that's okay.
Any questions or comments to Mr. Paglia, members of council? All right, I hear none. Okay, so if I can have a motion on the to receive the communications. Councilor Tonio, Councilor Jobin, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And also, members of council, I need a report to consider the engineers. Like I say, call upon our director to summarize the report. We've already done that. Thank you. So that the report and specification for the Antaya drain, as prepared by Mark Hernandez, professional engineer of Dillon Consultant Limited, and that dated November 12th, 2021 drainage report that be received, and that consideration be given in the first and second readings provisional bylaw number 2208 or 06, sorry, to adopt the drainage report in accordance with section 42 of the Drainage Act. And further, that notice be given to all affected landowners of the quarter revision to be held on Tuesday, March 8th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. in accordance with section 46-1 of the Act, subject to the adoption of the provisional bylaw. So on the recommendation. Moved by Deputy Mayor Marquetti and support. Councilor Jobin. On the recommendation, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And to both Mr. Sylvester and Ms. Eugenie, March 8th, 2022, and hopefully, as alluded to by Mr. Paglia, you should have a full report in your hands prior. Okay, members of council, nothing further. Adjournment is in order. Councilor Altenhoff move and supported by Councilor Dowie. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. So thank you very much. And to Mr. Sylvester and Ms. Eugenie, you know, if you can participate in our next meeting if you wish. You know, so if not, we bid you good night. And to the rest, well,